Feedback that I got was that you guys really liked the popular fantasy video. You really liked the popular sci-fi video. And you guys wanted me to give the same treatment to horror. Well, here I am. I am a man of my word. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back today to talk a little horror on the channel for a change. It is spooky season, so this seemed like the perfect time. Recently, I did a couple of videos where I talked about the most popular fantasy books that I've never read and the most popular sci-fi books I've never read, and making that change. Something I feel like has almost become like the little redheaded stepchild on my channel is the horror genre. I feel like I've got to shove it all into the month of October each year. So that's something I want to change going forward, and something I'm going to change that by is picking up some of those heavy hitters, some of those first ballot Hall of Fame kind of horror books that I have never really gotten to. So again, these aren't going to be any books that are going to be surprising anybody. These are all books you've probably heard of. I do try to get a little modern on here, so I do have some that have kind of been word of mouth, a little popular. But again, if you're looking for some deep album cuts, this might not be the video for you. So again, these are very, very popular books that I want to try to move up the schedule here. So these aren't ranked or anything, guys. I'm just going by release date order. And we're going all the way back to 1967 for the first one, guys. This is Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Now, I watched the movie for the first time last year for Fright Fest, my wife and I. If you guys don't know, we are actually talking about all of our Fright Fest videos on Mike's Media Reviews right now. So if you're into the horror content, we're talking about a ton of movies right now. So I really enjoyed the movie. Wife was a little, I think, let down just based off the legacy of it. But obviously the legacy for this story began with this book in 1967. Which scared every single expecting mother on the planet, I think. And the change that was going on in America at the time, and just seeing like why this was like kind of a scary thing. I could see this really, really freaking people out in the late 60s. So I always enjoy going back and seeing, the pillars of how things were built. And this is one that's kind of just set up this genre for a long, long time with its content matter. Next up, guys, we're moving up to 1971. I love I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, but I admit I have never read Hell House, which is amazing because of how much I love I Am Legend. Actually, it was one of my top 10 horror books of all time was I Am Legend, and it would not fall off of that list. And I don't know if I'm going to update that list or not. I've had lots of people ask me, you're going to update that list? I don't know. I don't know if I've read enough horror between now and then to make very many changes. But Hell House is one that is obviously, it's up there with Haunting a Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It's like one of the best haunted house stories ever. So it has quite the legacy behind it. I think Matheson is an incredible writer. I've read 2 of his books, but I would definitely be interested in picking up a third one here, and that would definitely be the next one of his that I do. And it just so happens that it is a horror novel and a very, very popular one as well. 1974, one of the authors I think I get recommended the most in my Stephen King books is James Herbert. A lot of people say he is very much the English Stephen King. Kind of flies under the radar a little bit here in the States, but once you bring up his name, a lot of horror aficionados will drop in the comments like, absolutely, he's one of the best. And I picked The Rats. That's the one I'm going with here, 1974. I know several of his books have been made into feature films. I don't know if The Rats is one of them. The Rats in the Walls, H.P. Lovecraft, that's one of my favorite Lovecraft stories. So obviously, rats are very creepy, So I thought that this sounded like the one that I wanted to start with. Don't know much outside of it, except just that's just the one. This is the title. It's going to be this or The Fog, and I went with The Rats because I've seen the movie of The Fog, and I said, like I did with the Adam Neville books, I wanted to make sure I go in, with something completely fresh when I'm starting a new author. That way I don't have these unchecked expectations because I like the movie or I didn't like the movie or I know what it's about or it's not like the movie, that kind of thing. So that's why I picked one that I haven't actually seen. Another big one, guys, 1979 Ghost Story by Peter Straub. I will admit, guys, I had this on my list a couple years ago, and I read The Talisman for the first time by Stephen King, and I had a highly unpopular opinion that I was not that crazy about the book. And I did admit that I think that I was giving all of the good in The Talisman. I was giving that credit to Stephen King, and everything I didn't like, I was giving to Peter Straub. So that was probably very unfair on me, and it was very unfair of me to do that. But, opinions have died down a little bit now, and I feel like I'm ready to check out Peter Straub on his own and see how he does. And Ghost Story is constantly listed as one of the best horror books ever written. So I'd like to see exactly what it was that caught Stephen King's eye, where he said, that's the guy that I want to collaborate with. So that would be the place, I think, to start. Still got to read Black House, but I've heard the things I didn't like about Talisman, which Richard, by the way, Richard's one of the worst characters in all of Stephen King's multiverse. That's what really ruined that book for me, and I don't know. I think maybe I had my expectations a little high for that book, and I feel like I took those frustrations out on Peter Straub, and I probably should not have done that, because obviously the guy is very, very respected in the horror community. Number 5 here, from 1985 here. I don't think, you got to kind of be hiding under a rock to not hear the name Clive Barker in the mid-80s. I read Weeb World a couple years ago, about 3 years ago, I think, when the first spooky season I did on the channel. I opened it up to readers, or I'm sorry, to viewers. What would you guys want me to read by Clive Barker? And Weeb World won. And then Weeb World was very much a fantasy book. It wasn't so much of a horror book. And I think that Clive Barker gets kind of labeled as a horror novelist, mostly because of that one quote where Stephen King said, I have seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker, talking about, I believe it was about Hellraiser, or Hellbound Heart. So I think that he's kind of gotten typecast as just a horror author, and I've learned that several of his books are not horror, especially the couple that I started with. But Damnation Game is the pick here, because I just wanted to make sure I got something that was really, really horror. I was tempted to do Books of Blood, but I said, no, I want to get a novel, not like a collection or anything like that. So the Damnation Game, don't know a damn thing about it, but I know it is quite popular amongst the Clive Barker fandom. I already read Hellbound Heart. I mean, that's just an amazing book. So I felt like this or Magica was the next way to go. But from what I understand, Damnation Game, because that's the two that I own. I know some people are going to say Cabal. I don't have Cabal, but I have a Magica, and I have, is it a Magica or is it Imagica? I've never really, no matter which way I say it, someone always tells me I'm saying it the wrong way. But I have the Damnation Game, and that's the one that I went ahead and went with because, like I said, due to its popularity, and apparently it is just a full-on horror book, and that is what this list would demand, right? I'm not crazy about the thriller/detective kind of angle. Now, Thomas Harris can still be kind of in multi-genres. He's kind of like the Blake Crouch in that regard. He can be multi-genre, I think. But Silence of the Lambs is one that always gets filed under horror. Now, I remember when the movie came out, at first it was marketed as a horror movie, and then they changed it to a thriller because they thought if we market this as a horror movie, it's never going to get any recognition by the Academy. And maybe it worked, you know, because it did win several Academy Awards that year. But I am still listing this as a horror novel. It still says horror on the spine, so I'm going with horror here, even though some people might say it is a thriller or a detective book or, you know, crime novel. I don't know. Maybe it can be all these things and more. But Thomas Harris is one of those authors I feel like I should have tried by now. And speaking of Blake Crouch, it was him that really got this on my radar. Because when I talked to him, not only when I had him on the channel, but we instant message all the time. And I was talking about his book, Desert Places, and he was just saying he was highly influenced by Thomas Harris. And I said, I haven't actually read him yet. And he was like, don't read another one of my books until you read Thomas Harris, because he deserves it. So I'm going to listen to Mr. Crouch on that one. But Silence of the Lambs, obviously a very, very popular movie. And that's one of those things like, oh, well, am I going to have all these expectations now because of that movie? Sometimes it works out, sometimes it don't. But at least now I've got, you know, faces to go along with those names. But that's an amazing movie, and I'm hoping that the book is just as good. I'm guessing that it is based off of the legacy that it has. Dan Simmons, 1989. This is Carrion Comfort. I think I'm 2 for 3 on Dan Simmons' book so far. And I wouldn't even say I really was not really for that one. Look, I loved Hyperion. It's one of my favorite sci-fi books ever. I would put that like top 3 sci-fi books. Incredible, incredible book. Paula Hyperion, not so much. It wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't really what I wanted. And I liked The Terror. I thought The Terror was a very, very good book. So Carrion Comfort, again, I don't know a lot about these guys because I don't even want to look up synopses because I'm always afraid that it'll spoil stuff. Because if you Google anything these days, it auto-completes and tells you, you know, the big spoiler ending. And when you come to horror, a lot of it is about that ending, right? And but this one, it's very, very highly recommended by a lot of people who love Dan Simmons. The things that I said I liked about his books, and said, hey, if you're still looking for some of the more scary stuff from Dan Simmons, this might be the one to go for. So again, I wish I could tell you more about it, guys, but I don't want to know too much. The year 2000 here, this is one that I think anytime I talk about any kind of book that might be a little weird or a little mysterious, everyone says, well, you got to read House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, because that is the craziest, kookiest, wackiest book ever, and it's an experience. And I always flirted with putting it on my spooky season list each year. But I started reading that book, Ship of Theseus, by, is it Doug Dorst with J.J. Abrams? And it was kind of like one of those mystery books. They take a long time to read because there's so many different things that you're going to and you're researching stuff. And I started reading that book last year, and after about 2 weeks, I was on like page 16. And I was like, I don't have the time for this right now. So that's why I've never put House of Leaves on a spooky season list, because I feel like this is a book that's going to take a long time, and I want to, because I want that full experience. So that's one that I said I would move off spooky season, but it's definitely high on my horror list because everyone talks about it. And everyone has a very hot take about either how great or how terrible it is. And I'd be anxious to see where I fall on it. And just I like the idea of just, being fully immersed in something that original, that unique, and just that kind of peculiar, I think, is the word that I always hear used to describe this book. But the idea of having to hold the book up in the mirror to read it and stuff, I mean, that's a full-on experience right there. It sounds really cool. 2005, Octavia Butler. This is a name that doesn't come up a lot, but the people that really are big fans of her really recommend her to me, and I've gotten recommended Fledgling at least a dozen times in that top 10 horror video. So again, guys, I wish I could tell you more about these. Don't know, but I just know that Octavia Butler obviously is very respected. It's a name I've heard for decades, and I've just never ever really had access to one of her books in my hand here. So I want to make it a point to check out her works here, and Fledgling would be where I would start. I already talked about Adam Neville. I read Last Days last week. Didn't really hit the mark for me. But I've already bought like 6 Adam Neville books, so I am willing to try him again here. I was going to go with No One Gets Out Alive because everyone recommends that to me, but if we're going by most popular here, I've got to say The Ritual is his most popular book, obviously, due to the success of that Netflix movie, which I did really enjoy. Now, I've heard a lot of people be like, I love the movie and I hated the book, so I don't know if that means there's big changes. I don't know if the narrative was just handled better. I don't know if maybe the movie was a little more fast-paced, because the thing I got out of Last Days was, let's pick it up a little bit. It definitely felt like a 300-page story, kind of spun into 500 words, so I don't know if that's a problem for him at all. But I have also been told by Adam Neville fans, look, I've been told I like him a lot, but then I've also been told you shouldn't start with Last Days because that book is divisive even amongst like hardcore Adam Neville fans. So they all wanted me to do No One Gets Out Alive, and I might end up doing that one next. But I would say as far as his most popular, The Ritual seems to be the one that is the most successful for him. And again, it's a great movie if you guys haven't seen it. 2016, this one's kind of recent, obviously, with the word of mouth on this one getting higher and higher. It's a little bit, I guess you would say, I don't even want to call it like YA horror, but it's just kind of a throwback, campy, fun, nostalgic kind of for like 80s horror. This is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This one has been recommended a lot. People saying like if you grew up reading like Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark and things like that, R.L. Stein, Christopher Pike, I think you'd probably like this book. If you don't take it too seriously. I think I've proven over the last year plus, guys, that I don't hate the YA genre. I think there's a place for it. What I don't like about YA is goofy love triangles and wish fulfillment and insta-love and things like that. A book like this, I don't think we're going to have too much of that. But I've been told it's an incredible coming-of-age story, and that's a weakness of mine. I love that. Plus, you slap on a little throwback to 80s slasher horror. Cool. I'm down with that. I just love that the front cover, S-tier cover. It really is. I mean, anyone Gen X like me, we're going to have that nostalgia for the old VHS cassette look, and I think it's a nice touch. But Grady Hendrix is one I've been told by a lot of fellow Gen Xers that I would have a good time with, because, if you don't take it too seriously and you just have a good time with it, I'm always down for a good time. Horror doesn't always have to be high literature for me. If I'm having a good time, or if I'm just feeling uncomfortable, feeling that sense of dread, those are things that I really prefer in horror. Because I always bring this up. It's like after you get past like the age of 12, is there a horror movie or a book that can actually scare you? No, I think it has to do those things that really get to you, like that sense of dread, like seeing that thing coming at you and there's nothing you can do about it and you're just gripping your armchair. That's the kind of horror that I like. But I Like if you look at American Horror Story 1984, I love that because it was just a throwback to my nostalgia for 80s horror slasher flicks. I love stuff like that. So if this is just, throwback fun to, The Exorcist and things like that, cool. I'm down with that. That would be a good time for me. Got a couple more here, and I always try to slip something a little unexpected on here, and I do have a manga. This is from 2017. I hope I'm saying his name right. Shujo Oshimi. This is called Blood on the Tracks. It has constantly been listed as one of the scariest manga of all time. Now, I read Junji Ito for the first time like 2 years ago with Spiral, which I liked a lot. So it's a high bar to get up there with Junji Ito because I thought that was just brilliant comic. And this one, again, this is just word of mouth off recommendations. People saying, like you want to get into manga, but you also are a huge horror fan because this is some really great stuff, and I think it's going to be exactly what you're looking for, but I've been told it's really messed up. My wife and I talked about this over on Mike's Media Reviews lately in our show Post Credits, where we're talking about The Host, is that it seems almost like Japan and Korean horror is just like completely kicking the pants off of Western horror right now just because they're not afraid to do anything. No one's ever safe. Women, children, dogs, cats, it don't matter. Anyone is expendable, and I feel like that's what I'm going to get a little bit with Blood on the Tracks, is a little bit of not just gross out horror, because I do think a lot of Spiral or Uzumaki was a lot of the body horror, but I think this might just have like some horrific elements in it. But again, it's just highly recommended, and a lot of people say it just absolutely freaked them out. I'm like, hey, I am here for that. Last one, guys, I got this one. I talked recently on a book haul. Got this from a viewer. It's Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. This is an author that has come up a ton in the Stephen King community. And I know I bring up Stephen King a lot because, guys, that's where I learn about all my horror stuff, is all my fellow Stephen King fans. Obviously, Stephen King, the master of horror, you're going to have a lot of people being like, hey, what reminds you of some throwbacks to some horror, from other authors and stuff. And Ronald Malfi and Nick Cutter are the ones that come with the most. Now, I've read 2 Nick Cutter books, and I've loved both of them. I'm going to be reading the Deep in the spring, so I put on here. I'm going to be reading the Deep here relatively soon. But I read Little Heaven, I read The Troop, and I liked it. So I'm hoping to have a similar experience with Ronald Malfi. Come With Me and Blackmouth are the 2 that I own. One physical and I own one on digital, but I think Come With Me is the one I'm going to start with. And it's just do it to word of mouth. And I think that most people have had nothing but amazing things to say about what he has put out so far. And again, I think anytime you have a horror book, you're going to get these, hey, let's just make a comparison to Stephen King. I mean, that's like every fantasy book for a while there was blank meets Game of Thrones. I mean, I feel like that's still, with the horror community, everything is either Stephen King's got a blurb on the front, or it's like Stephen King meets blank, So anytime any of these authors are compared to Stephen King, that obviously sets an unfair expectation from me. But I also think I'm going into it being like, I would be stunned. Now, with The Troop, that was right. I felt like young Stephen King. I was actually here for that. But I've actually heard Blackmouth is the one that's more like It by Stephen King. And Come With Me just sounds like it's something a little different. I've actually heard some people say it's more of a thriller than horror, but I feel like you get that with every horror book. Well, it's not actually horror. I think that horror fans try to talk themselves out of everything being horror, it seems like. So it really just depends on what you're looking for, I think, when it comes to this genre. And for me, like I said, I just want something that's going to, sure, the monsters and the violence. So that's cool. But with me, what are you scared of? Is that sense of dread. You can see that bad thing coming. Ain't a damn thing you can do to stop it. So I'm hoping that one of these 13 books has something like that I am looking for, guys. But that would be it. That would be the heaviest hitters that I can think of that I want to start kind of littering onto my TBR a lot more frequently. I think I've gotten to the point now, so I've made this popular fantasy, this popular sci-fi, and this popular horror list, and I think every time I've got an opening on my TBR, I want to select from that. I've already started on the sci-fi one. I already did Flowers for Algernon. I'm going to be doing the Forever War here pretty soon. So I'm excited to be littering all these new things onto my TBR that I probably would have never really thought about had I not really made these lists. So I want to thank you guys for watching and showing interest in some of these, and always for your recommendations, because that's where I learn. I never had Octavia Butler or Dan Simmons carrying comfort, or probably never even like Thomas Harris if I hadn't talked to other people about some of these things. So I always encourage recommendations down below, but I would love to know if you guys have read any of these. What did you think? Are there any that you feel like are some of the heavy hitters? Not just something you like, but something you think is very, very popular that maybe I haven't read yet, I'd love to hear about it, because I feel like of all the genres I talk about on this channel, horror is the one that really, really flies under the radar. It really comes from recommendations, word of mouth, for me to go ahead and pick them up. So drop in the comments, guys, and I will talk to you there.